Today I want to talk about Paradais by Fernanda Melchor. This was the second pick by Anthony Jeselnik Book Club. A short novel, but it's intense. The English translation was done by Sophie Hughes and it reads incredibly smoothly. I'm not going to spoil anything, I just want to talk about the experience of reading it. The first thing I want to talk about is the writing style. Anthony, when he did the video about this book, read some comments and letters that he received, and a lot of people were saying that they didn't like the writing style. And honestly, it surprised me because I loved it. For me, it was very intense. It keeps you very active and immersed into the story, and you follow all the stuff. The style that Fernanda Melchor uses is kind of recursive narration. It mentions something, then the narrative pulls back and shows us more information, more context about whatever was mentioned. We go into the context, history, and then we return to the main timeline. Sometimes it goes back in time and gives us information about the past. Sometimes it just expands around it and gives us more information about the other characters and the history and their connection to the main characters. It gives you a lot of information, yet it's not overloaded. You kind of navigate through this narration pretty smoothly. So again, honestly, I was kind of surprised when people said they didn't get into it as much. For me, it was very energetic, dynamic, and very smooth. For example, the first line of the novel is, "It was all Fat Boy's fault." That's what he would tell them. Immediately, you know that something has happened. Immediately know that someone is getting blamed about something, but we don't know who this guy is or who is blaming him for what. So we go back, we get more information about this character, this fat boy. We meet one of the main characters, whose name is Franco. He's a rich teenager who lives in a gated community. We see his habits, his obsessions, his fantasies, his obsessions, his environment. Then we meet Polo, the guy who wants to blame him for whatever happened. And he's a poor gardener who also works in that same gated community, and he's unhappy about his life. We learn a lot about his life through this recursive narration. We go back, we see his past, even his childhood, his relation with his grandfather, his current situation, and his relation with his cousin, everything. We get a lot of information. Then we see how these two guys met and what they are talking about. Through this is revealed the nature of both, and we learned even more about them with the interactions that they are having and whatever they are planning to do in the future. And we see a lot of stupidity, a lot of stupid choices, distance between two worlds of rich people and poor people, and this emotional gap, not just economic gap between them, but this emotional gap, the contextual gap between them and their lives, their opportunities, or the problems they have. Whatever is this guy obsessed, this rich kid, and what he thinks about and how he perceives the world around him. It's very insightful and very real. For me, it was very easy to read, not in terms of the story as, the moral side of it, which is pretty messed up. I grew up in a country where we had this kind of class and economic gap between the people. We had the rich kids who thought that they were untouchable, that they would get away with everything, and then we had the poor kids who got entangled in this kind of power dynamics and bad influence that were coming from these rich kids who thought that they just could get away with everything, and sometimes they did. Sometimes they'd get away. And the thing is that when I was reading this was kind of familiar in terms that I have seen both of these characters in my life. I've met those kind of people. When Anthony was describing and discussing this book, he said that a lot of people who wrote to him, they said that it was difficult for them to get into it. They hated everything. Of course, emotionally, you hate it. But for me, it was very familiar words because I knew these characters. I have met those characters. I know, I've heard of them. I've seen the despicable stuff that these people have done. And then I've seen how they would get away, or how they would throw the poor kid under the bus, or how would they just everybody get away with it, even with those poor friends, because sometimes they're a bro code or whatever, and if sometimes the rich family wouldn't have any other choice to pull everybody out, because then there would be no way for their kids to survive whatever mess they made, right? So all this stuff was kind of familiar for me, and I think that the way you perceive and the way you read this book depends on your background. If you come from the country or from the environment where you have seen this kind of stuff, where this kind of stuff is common, and you have experienced it even as a witness, for you this would be very familiar read. It would be disturbingly familiar, but then you are just reading through it. It's something like, oh yeah, this has happened. I've heard this. I know this. It's disturbing. It's intense. It's emotional. At some point, it gives you a little bit anxiety because it's familiar, because it's kind of reminds you of whatever you have seen or heard back in your life. But if you are someone who comes from relatively stable and I would say vanilla environment, it might feel extreme, uncomfortable, which is of course how it is intended. But for me, it wasn't over exaggeration. It wasn't overdone. It was very realistic. It makes it extra disturbing somehow, or maybe disturbing in a different way for someone who is just reading it as who has only heard or seen this in the news or movies or whatever. But if you're someone who is actually very distant from this kind of stuff and never experienced that kind of environment in your life, then this is something very real. You can say that it's a reliable source of knowing what people are going through and how people are living. And of course, the characters, you do not empathize with them because they are stupid, they are cruel, they have all this toxicity, they immerse in this toxicity with each other, they push each other to the edge. And the novel itself, it's kind of life. You don't want to like these people, you don't want to empathize with these people, but you know these people, you recognize them, you've seen it, you've heard it. That's why I really liked it, because it was too real and well written in terms of not giving you anything extra, not to exaggerate anything, but just making it as real as possible. So that's what I wanted to say about this book. If you have read this book within Jeselnik Book Club or independently, please share your thoughts. If you like this video, I'm not doing like book reviews and recaps. When I talk about books, I just want to have conversation with someone who liked or didn't like the book. So I'm just sharing my opinions and thoughts and how I feel when I read this or that book. So if you like that kind of content, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.